welcome back to Infamous Indy. I'm your host, That Dead Girl, and basically what I do here is I sit down and I share with you a true crime story from my home state of Indiana. And with that being said, this week I just want to get right down into it. This week I want to share with you all the story of April Tinsley. April Marie Tinsley was born on March 18th, 1980 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was a typical 8-year-old girl, very precocious, very outgoing, and it's said that she was very loved by all of her family and friends. She was a member of the children's choir at Faith United Methodist Church, and she attended second grade at Fairfield Elementary School. On April 1st, 1988, which just so happened to fall on Good Friday that year, April Tinsley was outside playing with her friends. And basically, they were kind of playing in between houses, meaning, you go to this house and you play for a little bit, and then you go to the other friend's house and play for a little bit. Now, by today's standards, this might seem kind of odd, but this was definitely a normal thing that kids did in the 80s. So April and her two friends are playing, having a good time, and at some point throughout the afternoon, April decided that she was going to go to another friend's house to retrieve an umbrella that she had previously left there. April tells her friends, "I'm going here, I'm going to get my umbrella, and I will be right back." And it said that April left the friend's house sometime around 3 p.m. Now, some time had passed. The girls continue on playing. They're children, so they're basically just thinking, well, maybe April just decided to just go on home. So, in the 80s, it's dinner time, the street lights are on, and everyone knows, like, that's the universal time, to go home. But on this particular evening, April Tinsley did not show up for dinner. And immediately her mother called police, as this was definitely not like April to be late or not show up for dinner on time, as she knew what time she was expected to be home every night. So immediately, Fort Wayne police are actually taking this case very seriously. They actually assemble a search team, compiled of neighbors and Fort Wayne police officers. This search team ended up having about 250 people in it. Everyone, was shocked. They just wanted to know what happened to April. So during this time, the whole community really came together as a whole to try to help find her. Although this initial search really turned up nothing and no clues as to the whereabouts of April, they did come across an eyewitness who had reported seeing a white male in his 30s in a blue pickup truck trying to force a young girl into said truck, and the witness actually believed that that little girl was April Tinsley. Sadly, on April 4th, 1988, April's body would be discovered in a ditch by a jogger just outside of Spencerville, Indiana, only 3 days after she had initially disappeared. Near the site of the crime scene, police would go on to find a little bit of evidence. One piece of evidence being one of April's shoes, as well as a brown paper bag that actually contained some type of sex toy. A motorist would later go on to report seeing a blue pickup truck in the area in the days leading up to the discovery of April's body. April's autopsy report would go on to conclude that April was sexually assaulted and the official cause of death was named asphyxiation. This report also determined that April had been dead for 1 to 2 days before her body was discovered, basically meaning that as soon as she was taken, her life ended shortly thereafter. The report also found that April's body was most likely placed in the ditch only 4 hours prior to it being discovered. This crime absolutely rocked, the community of Fort Wayne. To say people were scared is an understatement. No one could believe that someone amongst them was capable of such a crime. There was just an outpouring of support for April Tinsley's family, and everyone really just wanted to find who was responsible for April's death. Now, the early investigation would eventually lead police to a suspect, a 34-year-old male. Now, this man had been charged with child molestation in a completely separate case, but then he would eventually go on to be acquitted of all those charges the very next month. So basically, this lead ended up being a dead end. So after this first initial break in the case, nothing else turned up, and this case would end up going cold for a very long time. On May 21st, 1990, 3 years after April's death, police would find a message scrawled into the side of a barn in St. Joseph Township. This message read, "I killed 8-year-old April M. Tinsley. Did you find the other shoe? Ha ha, I will kill again." Now, this message appeared to be scrawled onto the side of this barn in crayon. And actually, police would later go on to find a box of crayons at the scene, you know. How creepy is that? Number one, a child killer taunting police, scrawling messages on a barn with crayons. Like, whoever this individual is clearly sick in the head. So this creep, this child predator, if you will, now 3 years after the fact, has the audacity to taunt police in the community of Fort Wayne. Like, you took the life of a young girl, you sexually assaulted her, stole her innocence, and now you are bragging about it. And you guessed it, after finding this note scrawled on the side of the barn, the case would go cold yet again. And then we come to Memorial Day weekend in 2004. 4 more additional notes were found all throughout Fort Wayne that were believed to be written by April's killer. 3 of these notes were left actually on the bicycles of little girls, and the other note was left inside a mailbox. Now, these notes were placed in plastic bags, and inside of these plastic bags, used condoms were found, as well as Polaroid pictures of a man's lower horn, if you will. And I did just want to take a second to read what the notes actually said. I mean, they basically all said this same thing, so bear with me. I wanted to make sure that I, read it correctly. But the notes read, "Hi, honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped and killed April Marie Tinsley. You are my next victim. If you don't report this to police, and if I don't see this in the paper tomorrow or the local news, I will blow up your house." So now, he's obviously been watching these young girls from afar to know how, when, and where to leave these notes, basically threatening to kill them, if they don't do what he says. But clearly, the person who did this was a complete moron, because he actually ejaculated into the condoms that he left behind in these plastic bags. So police were actually able to obtain his DNA from these used condoms. And this was really the smoking gun, because the DNA that they collected from the used condom was then compared to a bit of DNA that they had found at the initial crime scene. And you guessed it, they matched. They have the DNA now. This is like a huge break in the case for them. At least now they have something to work with. On June 24th, 2005, April's parents would end up holding a press conference outside of the Allen County Courthouse, basically just asking for leads. If anybody knows or has seen anything, please come forward. Basically, any little bit of information will help. In June of 2009, authorities would go on to contact the FBI to try to help them solve April's murder and get to the bottom of this investigation. April's story would eventually go on to be featured in America's Most Wanted, Crime Watch Daily, and On the Case with Paula Zahn. And although April's case did get quite a bit of media attention, especially in the early days. This case was cold and went unsolved for more than 30 years. In July of 2018, the Fort Wayne Police Department would end up naming John D. Miller as the person who murdered April Marie Tinsley. Using forensic genealogy, police were able to find a DNA match. And like I said previously, they were able to do this by comparing the semen from the used condoms left behind with the notes, and they compared this with some DNA they had taken from the crime scene. So after 30 years, numerous possible suspects, police even investigated theories about a satanic cult and witchcraft being involved. Finally, the Fort Wayne police had their suspect, they had their man, and now, what happens next? What happens to John D. Miller? Now, the thing that I found super creepy about this is the fact that when police showed up to initially take John in for questioning, they had asked him, do you know why we were here? And without hesitation, he says, the death of April Tinsley. So, he automatically knew the jig was up. And it said that on the way down to the police station, he just carried on normal conversations, talking about sports, talking about the weather, showing no indication that this was a man who was guilty of rape and murder. It's also said that John D. Miller showed absolutely no remorse and never apologized, for what he did. So John Miller would go on to enter a plea deal, obviously wanting to take the death penalty off the table, because obviously when it's a death of a child, I think that that's what most people would deem justifiable. He would later be sentenced to 50 years for murder with an additional 30 years for child molestation. And during the trial, April's mother and several other of her family members actually got a chance to stand up and confront John Miller and, say their piece. April's mother accused John Miller of ruining her family and essentially treating her daughter and her body like a piece of trash. While April's cousin would just later go on to tell him that he was a monster directly to his face. And I know I always go on my little rants, but in my mind, obviously I'm glad that he at least got some punishment, but in my mind, like I said, I don't think that it's a just punishment. Any person who can harm a child in any way literally does not deserve to be breathing the same air as the rest of us. And I think I kind of glossed over it before, but he nonchalantly gave his confession. He fully admitted to cruising around April's neighborhood and essentially stalking small children looking for a child to abduct. This was premeditated in every single sense of the word. He did go on to claim that he didn't know April and he hadn't necessarily been following her. He just knew that that day when he saw her, that was going to be the child he would abduct. Keep in mind, he also confessed to the sexual assault, and he also confessed to strangling her. I mean, this was a child, and I really think that that is the only argument that's even valid here. With that being said, I didn't really look into it too much to see if he was still alive. Fuck that guy, to be honest with you. I'm glad that he was convicted. I'm glad that he was sentenced. I'm glad that there was never a chance of him ever getting out again. Like I said, if you can do that to a child, you just don't deserve to be breathing right now. My heart goes out to April and, all of her friends and family that were affected by this. I mean, it's just horrible. If you are a returning viewer, as always, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means a lot to me to know that there are actually people out there, who tune in and watch the videos that I create. Thank you, thank you. If you're new here, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, if you like what I do here at Infamous Indy, please feel free to share my content. dropping, a few new things this weekend to make up for, being gone for almost a month. So definitely be on the lookout for all of the new content. And as always, stay spooky, keep it creepy, and watch your back because it's a crazy fucking world out there.